Casta paintings respond largely to that curiosity about what was happening on the other side of the world, where the king never set foot.
They seem to be giving you a window into the private lives of people in colonial Spanish America.
Reading the historical context of these paintings and reading about the Casta system, I'm also quite shocked by what I've learned about the Casta system.
Why did they create the paintings? Who were they for? Why were they trying to define race in this way?
I can't look at these paintings without seeing elements of racism in them.
The fact there's a hierarchy based on the colour of your skin, the more or less important you are in society. This is 100% the legacy of the Casta painting thinking.
The paintings that the Leicester Museum have are a surprise. When they were discovered in the basement and the stories that came out in the press were really surprising for all of us.
Well, I started at the museum 2009 as a trainee curator. We spent a lot of time down in the basements and we were just cleaning up one day. There was a collection of paintings that was just sat by the back door in the basement. They just caught my eye. And when I looked closely at them, the first one that I saw was the Spaniard and the Negro producer Mulata. Straight away, just reading that text on it, I knew that this was something quite different.
The story about this painting was really wonderful and surprising because it's possibly one of the earliest sets. I would date them around 1715 and 1725 and attribute them to the circle of Juan Rodriguez Juarez, who was a major painter in New Spain, or the Viceroyalty of Mexico, in the 18th century.
So that was the thing for me. This was a black woman that looked like she was in a family setting with a child and a white gentleman. So I'd never, ever seen anything like this before, and especially of the age that it was. The only thing we had on them at that point was that they'd come into the museum in 1852.
We have to remember that the world was very closely connected, but the communication didn't ensue as quickly as it ensues for us today. There was no email, there were no planes, there were no trains, there were ships, and they took oftentimes between 6 months to a year to traverse the Atlantic. And that brought about curiosity about other parts of the world that people didn't have access to. And Casta paintings respond largely to that curiosity about what was happening on the other side of the world, where the king never set foot.
So what Casta paintings show is they show you biracial families. That is what is at the heart of them. And I think that's what people found really captivating and sort of exciting in the 18th century.
Yeah, I mean, I can't look at these paintings without seeing elements of racism in them. And that's been the hook for me. And I think that's the bit that has inspired other people to be involved in the story. It's also the bit that has caused a lot of backlash. You know, there's a lot of people out there that don't want to have these conversations.
I get very emotional about this because the word is colorism. The fact there's a hierarchy based on the colour of your skin, the more or less important you are in society. This is 100% the legacy of the Casta painting thinking, or the long thinking in terms of the simplicity. The lighter skinned you are, the closer you are to whiteness, the better off you are in society, the more acceptable you are in society, and as a consequence, the better job you'll have.
There are still very, very bizarre notions about what the new world is. And in some ways, the Casta paintings are responding to that, where, for example, they'll see the Indios Barbaros, the barbarian Indians, and for many in Europe at that period, that's it, that's America.
We're talking about a genre that spans over 100 years. And if you think that most sets are composed of 16 paintings each, you multiply that 120 times over, which is the number of sets that we have been able to identify, you're really talking about an extraordinarily large body of work, more than 2,000 paintings that depict this process of racial mixing in colonial Mexico.
The one that's on display in London has a mother and a father, and their little child is labeled a coyote, a coyote. And lots of people raised eyebrows at that. Lots of people read this and they thought, okay, this doesn't seem very comfortable. So I think that we absolutely recognize the hierarchical and fundamentally racist way in which the vocabulary of these paintings encourages us to look at the people who are depicted.
Because you can't look at these paintings without seeing the links to enslavement, without seeing the links to colonization, and really kind of that understanding of putting people into positions, into places, and making sure they stay in those places. One thing I always do is try and do things differently. And if they say that you can't do it or it's never been done before, I'm going to try it. Hanging paintings that are severely damaged is something that's never been done before. It was something that needed to happen because we just wanted to show what they looked like and get an understanding of why they looked like that. There are many paintings locked in museums that are really looked after, and these weren't. We set up a collection of events that we could do where we've had some really high-level guests. We had Subhadra Das and Angela Saini, and they both do work on white supremacy and human taxonomy, because that's the basis of these paintings is human taxonomy. I think when we were looking at art and social, I wanted to get Robert Beckford in the room. We'd brought in Maggie Scott and Faye Munro to do separate workshops. What I wanted people to do was come up to the paintings as I did and then get that shock.
I remember Tara when she told me about it 10 years ago, so it's nice to see that it's come all this way and she's able to actually get the focus on it and be able to tell the whole world about these paintings.
The first thing I noticed was the tenderness, actually, of the paintings, that there was a pride, I was very interested in the painters, first of all, who is it that were making these images? And that's before I knew the context.
They were looking at those paintings and creating those paintings to create segregation, to create a negative difference between the different races that they were seeing.
It's history. The paintings are history. You know what I mean? Somebody's painted them so that you can look back and see that is the time. Like you'd look on the TV today and find out what happened in certain situations. That's all going into history, you know what I mean? It's all embedded.
With racial categorization, and it's persisted and it perseveres, and people still try to buy into the idea today that we have this hierarchy based on somebody's, appearance.
I find it difficult to talk about mixed race. To me, it's a misnomer, because mixed race implies it's the pure race. So coming back to this white person, this person is white. We look at the Casta paintings, it recognizes, you look at the genetic mix of people who are supposedly white, it can be complex with the Indian heritage or complex with black heritage. It's inbuilt with white supremacy, the pseudo-scientific racism that underpins the Casta painting stories. So I do get angry, because are you pure race? Come on.
I wanted to get Robert Beckford in the room. It was a real honour to have him talk about the paintings and their relation to his research and understand it from his perspective.
I think it's there in the Caribbean, but you have to maybe move towards the Dutch. The Dutch colonies in the West Indies had 12 gradations of blackness. So you start with black plus white equals, mulatto. Mulatto plus black equals Sambo. Sambo plus, and the list goes on, quadroon, odd, you get to 12 different gradations. So it exists within the West Indies, but within the wider ecology of colonization as well.
Before the making of the Casta paintings, society, the Iberian society, was divided in religious line, following the principle of the purity of blood. This is very important to understand. Purity of blood is a kind of eugenics, really.
I wanted to bring Michael and Subhadra together because I just thought they would be a great mix. Being at the Leicester Museum made complete sense. Francis Galton is known as the godfather of eugenics.
What we have here is one criminal and one non-criminal. But which one's which?
I've got he looks learned and intelligent. I'm sorry.
He does he?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's this. I'm probably going completely wrong, but I just.
We'll keep going and we'll see.
The way the bride's there's just something not quite right. But he's got that noble feature, looking into this, contemplating the future and trying to bring it together in his own mind.
I'm sorry to have to tell you, you've got it completely the wrong way around.
Oh no!
So our criminal is here, and our high-minded member of society is here. These busts are from a collection of life and death masks. So some of them were taken while the people were alive, some of them were taken after the people had died. What about him speaks to highbrowness to you?
The serenity of the face, the uniformity of the structure. I would not see him as a criminal.
What Noel was trying to do was he said, well, we know that this person is a criminal. And we know that this person is somebody who we hold in high esteem in our society. What did their heads and what did their faces tell us about those characteristics?
The leaps they make from the size of the head to whether you're a good person or a bad person, it just seems too big.
In a sense, this idea that you can tell everything you need to know about a person from what they look like, that feeds into the Casta painting.
Well, I'd say the Casta paintings are, for me,
yeah,
are a better instrument.
In what way?
Because it's the visual thing the Casta paintings give you, make them much easier to kind of create and control society, because it's just one up from sumptuary laws in terms of what way people dressed.
Yeah.
So it's a much more, how can I say, easier, simpler way of organising society. This is in retrospect here.
Annabelle's somebody that's been recruited by the museum, so I've not actually met her yet. We'd had a few conversations over the phone. She seems amazing. Going down, making the arrangements to see her was great and nerve-wracking, and not knowing if somebody would care for these paintings as much as they needed to.
Obviously, I've never come across these types of paintings, and in fact, a lot of people, when I've mentioned them to even curators, I've had to explain what they are. I'm hoping that someone else has done some research on the materials that have been used in other Casta paintings to see how this one or these compare. They're quite contradictory paintings from my point of view, because on the one hand, as portraits, they're very beautifully painted. It's very exciting and really interesting. On the other hand, reading the historical context of these paintings and reading about the Casta system, I'm also quite shocked by what I've learned about the Casta system and the context in which these were painted.
It was her care. She did everything she possibly could to make sure these paintings had the best start to their new life. This is one of my favourites, but I don't think I've given the other two enough of a chance because of the damage and how little you could see on either of them. But this was the one that really caught my eye straight off. This was the one that was in the front when all five of them were stacked up.
Yes.
We found out a lot about her clothing because this embroidery is traditional Mexican.
Right.
So it's kind of a traditional wear that she has on.
It's a bit unusual to have a painting that's on such a red.
So you think they painted it red first and then painted on top of it?
Yes. And my challenge is that this ground layer here is quite sensitive to solvents. which makes the cleaning quite difficult. But when I was cleaning, I was very disappointed by the amount of damage in this lower right corner, especially this teacup actually, which I didn't realise would be so damaged and been overpainted and retouched a lot. And I'm still in the process of removing some of that retouching and overpaint mechanically under the microscope, but I'm hoping that most of the pattern on the teacup will still be there. So this just is an indication of how yellow the varnish is.
There were certain things, like if we're saying that some of this was done 19th century, then they didn't come into the museum until 1852. So it could have been done before.
The paintings were restored at some point in the 19th century, and then in the 20th century, when they were at Leicester Museum, they were used as
training pieces.
As training pieces,
Yeah.
yes, and the cleaning tests were carried out. And their faces, of course, will, at the moment, you just can't see them. You can't even see their expressions, really. Some damage has been done, although at this stage I'm not quite sure how much damage. The reason I'm using an acrylic rather than a water-based adhesive is because of all this wax. The acrylic will go in more easily.
Why were these just put in the back and allowed to get into this state and used for conservation processes when there are other paintings of people that are unknown in the museums and they're hanging up being preserved as they should be?
There's been very little information until recently about what these paintings represent, and especially as they're not a complete set. Maybe I don't know.
So this is Ilona's book. To me, this book was the Bible. This was the one that kind of set everything in place for me. It was light bulbs.
It says in the book, these paintings, and only 7 of them are known to exist, and they date from 1715 and are the earliest examples to represent the colony's mixed race as part of a family group.
Yeah. So we're on the same wavelength.
I would put my mortgage on them being part of that. They're the lost ones, I think. I'm convinced.
For me, I was certain of what they were. So Ilona coming over and saying, yes, they are 1710, they are the originals, was just like a punch in the sky moment for me.
Can you see that there's more than one person in this picture? Can you see that there's multiple ears and multiple sets of hands and like the shoulders don't quite line up? So these are superimposed mugshots, actually, of prisoners from Pentonville prison.
So not from the same family as the different prisoners?
Yeah, these are different prisoners. One thing they had in common was the type of crime they had committed. All right. And so that's what he was trying to do, was to say, well, what exact physical characteristics did these criminals have in common? Let's try and superimpose the images, and his theory, his working theory, was that those characteristics they have in common will come out, and those they don't will recede.
So let me get this right then. You're saying to me, he's found all the people who saved stolen sheep.
Yeah, yes.
So
yeah.
all those big...
Can you tell?
A sheep stealer.
A sheep stealer.
Okay,
exactly.
then would you just go as far to say, well then,
yeah.
we've got bank robbers over here.
Uh-huh.
So there's a bank robber profile and there's
I know you're laughing, but genuinely...
But did you get anywhere with this?
Well, now, here's the thing. The thing that you literally just made up as something completely laughable and ridiculous was the life's work of an Italian scientist called Cesare Lombroso, who was a criminologist, and he created albums and albums of photographs of criminals. And he was like, what are the characteristics that make a blackmailer, a street robber? How can we define these criminal types? And so that's why Galton was really interested in doing these experiments, because he's like, well, we've got this new technology, let's see how it works. He started to look at race, which in the context of the Casta paintings, things that were happening in the 1700s, Galton is now looking at in the 1880s, again in ways that are quantifiable and scientific. And guess what? He didn't think that the pictures of the criminals could tell you much. He didn't think that the pictures of the tuberculosis patients could tell you much. But when it came to taking pictures of Jewish schoolboys and superimposing those on each other and trying to find the Jewish type. He's like, yep, this works.
He brought the baggage with him. As Edward Long, he took the Casta painting ideas,
Yeah,
and he nailed them onto black people.
yeah.
But then he laid all these negative ideas in terms of the body smell, their shiftiness, their sexuality, their frivolity, all these things he put on white people.
Yeah.
From looking at their skin, that was it.
Those people considered themselves rational.
It's in the same box as dehumanizing people.
I got the experts that had been investigating the paintings for the last 20 years. But the reason behind that was because one of the things I say that makes this story different for me is when I look at those paintings, I see myself. We understand things from our own perspectives. So each one of those researchers had researched different elements of the paintings.
Michael had no experience with the Casta paintings when we first approached him, but he had a great knowledge of black people within artworks that we thought would be a great mixture with the other experts.
It's really about matching the colour. The best way to get the right colour is to build up the colours. So because this is on a red ground, I have to put that red ground layer in first, or else the colour on top just won't work. You can't get it in one go. You have to build up the colours in the same way that the artist would have layered the colours.
This was a middle-aged man the last time I saw. Quite a portly middle-aged man.
A couple of layers of varnish, like here.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
No,
not
he's
surprised.
he's quite a stud.
I'm not surprised. Steady.
There is a revival and amplification of the black legend that Spain is this backward Catholic country. And there is a rhetoric of inferiority around Spain itself.
I always think it's about white blokes maintaining their power base. I'm in charge here. I organise society. I organise society to the point I can define who is in society, how they fit in.
It's more that these paintings were created in response to massive anxiety by the white Spaniards who were losing their power base.
These power structures still resonate to this day. And you see in people like Trump, in terms of, by right, I'm the most important person in the room. You know, it doesn't recognise others.
These paintings and a lot of the ideology that comes with them are the underpinnings of many of our societal problems today.
There's a kind of instability, a not worthiness. I've got to assert myself.
People have really bucked against the idea that there may be something that's quite controversial within these paintings and just wanted to see the visual aesthetics of it. They just show a time where people was mixing without understanding the reality that these were kind of the beginning, a starting point to a certain extent for some of the angst that we have in the community now and presently that we live with. You know, these are visually putting it in place.
What's stunning about these, I mean, this is a genre that is popular for 100 years.
I understand the negativity that's within those paintings, but to me they're still beautiful.
It's a really good question how these paintings ended up in Leicester. So we can work backwards from 1852 when the paintings were donated to the Leicester Museum a little bit. So they were donated by somebody called William Noble. He donated the paintings. It seems very likely that he got them from the nearby town of Leamington Spa. And in Leamington, the paintings were owned by an interesting individual called James Bissett. So where had Bissett got his paintings? Well, he got them from a series of auctions that took place in London between 1801 and 1803. So they came from a stately home that belonged to somebody called Colson Scotto in the 1770s. Before that, the trail for me has gone cold. We can form some hypotheses because we know about another set of paintings by the same artist family, also in Britain, in Breamore House in Hampshire.
When you look at these paintings now, what kind of springs to mind? What do you see?
Ooh, I mean, that's a very difficult question. I guess it's a snapshot in time with people living in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. I really wanted to know about the history of the Casta paintings that you have here, and I wondered kind of when they came here, if you have any knowledge of that.
Regarding the history, we believe they were painted around 1720. They were certainly recorded as being in the house by the mid-19th century, but there is a massive gap about how they arrived. Putting a lot of trade goods in, all parrots and things, which would have been quite exotic. You're saying we're doing a good job in Mexico, if you were Spanish, and that everyone's sort of happy, wealthy, etc. And you know how great we are.
How great we are.
The clothes are obviously smart and clean and everything, but I mean there's not a huge amount to suggest that outside the painting Mexico is sort of particularly happy or wealthy.
To see those paintings back, I was just so excited. And I came down and I saw Annabelle putting the frames on them, which was great, but it was, I needed more excitement. I needed to see all of them all in one. But the next day, to come back with the people that had seen them first, Robert Lee, he was with me at the very beginning of this story, and I couldn't have wanted anybody else there. He was the one. Maggie Scott and Faye, it was important that they saw them first. I genuinely just wanted to see their expressions, their faces.
But this was really dirty.
Well, you couldn't see the
You
most
couldn't
of it.
see.
Because all of here was all covered. This was the one with the Union Jack thing.
That's right.
Over it.
You're
So you couldn't see that he had the instrument.
You know what's really interesting? Look at the hand. So this is someone who has the ability to give you shape and form, right? Yeah. Look at what's happened here. You're not getting that sense of dexterity, understanding the form. Or is it that this person is just lazy and just...
I don't think so, because the amount of detail that you have here, and I think that speaks so much to that whole area of just not seeing black people, black skin. And that carried on into art school. I was at art school in the 70s. Still people didn't know how to mix the colour to get skin, because I used to model sometimes, in the school. And it was extraordinary. There had to be a whole new discussion with the art teacher about what's the base that you use to get black skin. Mm-hmm. So, and this is the 70s. So I think it speaks much more of that, and how there's just generic black person in there.
Because you can see here, there's the depth that exists here. There's no attempt to create that depth there. The attempt was never made, right? The attempt here to create something that is vibrant doesn't exist here. It's almost if the person who painted this is different from the person who painted this and this. These may have been real people with real lives that we have now given a new lease of life to. Some of this is about possession as well, isn't it? It's about that hierarchy of possession and blood, and what blood is pure, what kind of mentality is superior, who is a barbarian. Today we don't really call people barbarians anymore, but we might call them terrorists.
Yeah.
So we ascribe words to people that don't necessarily in reality. So if I'm fighting for something that actually belongs to me, does that make me a terrorist if you've come to take my thing away? Look, there's so much wrapped up in this. It's not just the caste and the casta. We're always looking for difference, aren't we? We are. Yeah, the otherness. Yeah.
can't believe such historical pieces have been hiding away for so long. It's a significant piece of history which we all need to begin to understand its place in history and where we fit into that.
As a person of colour, I think it obviously relates to me. It's very interesting to put yourself in those shoes and see how they would feel and how it feels to me.
And it's great to see so many people, also people that I have met before who came to my studio and saw the paintings being worked on, and now seeing the paintings as they are in their finished state.
This has just been, the only word I can use, I know it sounds like cliche, awesome. To actually see them in the flesh, the vibrancy, the colour. When you compare our other black presences from the period, these are truly, truly, truly exceptional.
It's brilliant to see those paintings in the flesh and people of colour being represented so well. I think it's really important that people like Tara are endorsing the messages that these paintings do bring up. Without that conversation, nothing improves.
It really kind of brings home, and in the context of who stands at the top of the pile and who sits at the bottom. But it mirrors exactly what is happening across the globe right at this moment. We are really no further forward until we can completely replace the system with one which is more equitable, one which is more representative of Mother Nature's diversity.
What do you think you're looking at here?
The purpose of it, I think having listened to you about the heads and the photographs, this is an attempt to categorize and create a hierarchy. Now, are you going to say there are good eyes, bad eyes?
Well, we'll start with the eyes. So you're 100% right. You're absolutely spot on. It's about categorizing human appearance, right? As far as the hair samples are concerned, you're absolutely right. It's about creating categories, but also creating hierarchy. What hierarchy do you think is at play here? Where's the best and where's the worst in this hierarchy?
Obviously, we're going with the blonde, the Nordic blonde. That's the definition of.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I never knew that there was this distinction. There was so many different kinds of light-coloured hair.
But to be honest, I don't see my own hair there, so I'm not fully convinced.
Normal is, it's blonde, it's brunette, it's straight hair.
Yeah.
Okay. And on either side, you have the outliers.
You say this is the best. This is the.
According to the person who created this device, to do with rarity, right?
Yeah.
And to do with unusualness, actually, is what he was working on. But let's focus on this side of what Professor Dr. Eugen Fischer, who's the German scientist who came up with this device. What he created this device to do was to measure the relative whiteness of mixed race people who were the children of local Southwest African women and other English or German soldiers in Southwest Africa at the turn of the 20th century.
To what end?
Unfortunately, genocide. They are racialized in particular ways, either according to their eye color, their skin color, or very particularly according to their hair color and texture. And depending on where your hair fell on this scale could be the difference between life and death. If it was straight enough, you could be salvageable. The black could be bred out of you, is how they would look at it. But if your hair was too curly, and you notice that, as you were saying, your hair isn't even on this scale because it's not even worth considering. Those are people to be eliminated. That is where we end up when we start to build these categories and hierarchies. I did warn you. I'm sorry, it's horrible.
Wow, scientific genocide. No, come on. How long did this is the stupidity.
Well, I'm sad to say. So Fischer was working in the country was called the country now known as Namibia, and was instrumental in the Nama Herero genocide in the around 1905 to 1908, widely acknowledged as the first genocide of the 20th century. The people, those groups of people who I named there, Nama people, Herero people, who are local to that area, their population was wiped out up to 75%.
I'm challenged by that because Casta was just trying to create an order of society. It wasn't about killing people. This is and you can see this is part of the same spectrum. Definitely, it's on the spectrum, but it's at the far end of it. This is about destroying human beings. I'd like to believe we're trying to be better.
Yeah.
We're trying to be better, but still, as long as we have to understand racial differences.
And understand our history as well, which is why I think it's important to have these conversations. It's important to look at the history of race science, the history of the Casta paintings. The more we know our history, the more we know where our ideas come from, the stronger position we're in to start to break this down so that we can be better for everyone.
The Casta paintings really tried to show you the negatives. They tried to develop a narrative that showed you one was better than the other. What we tried to do is turn that on its head and show the beauty of interracial families and how positive that can be, and really just change that narrative. One of the things that we're bringing out within the exhibition is who controls the narrative. When you're looking at something, who controls what you're seeing? Who makes those decisions? And I think very much so within these paintings, somebody's made a decision about what they want you to see and what you want to take from that. So what we did at the Riverside Festival was really try and recreate the Casta paintings and just show that we can make it better. What a journey. Oh my gosh. What a roller coaster. What a fascinating experience to have been on. But it was so important to me to make sure the narrative around these paintings were correct. I'm not sure many people have looked at these paintings in the relationship that I have to understand their links to enslavement and really understand the connotations that have come from these paintings and the stories and the narratives behind these paintings that was being perpetuated within these paintings. The links to the scientists that was developed these stories further with the pseudoscience, the links to specific painters that had followed on with the narrative in different ways, to right up to today, to analysing how the effects of colourism, the effects of critical race theory really have an effect on the way we live today. And those paintings were a form of social media of their time. They were a way of showing people who they were and what they could be. Now we're doing it just the same, but in different ways. It's more subtle. And until we talk about it, until we have really thrush out these conversations, we don't change. So these are narratives, these are stories that are hugely important to today's society. And these paintings have just enabled us to have those conversations.